The medieval Mongols had a lot to fear, and they desperately wanted answers. Answers to the things that were happening in their world, the sudden storms that could wipe out entire herds, the diseases that killed without warning, the enemies who seemed to know their plans before they made them. But without the scientific knowledge that we have today, they had to rely on their own imaginations, along with ancient myths and shamanic traditions, to make sense of everything. The result was a world absolutely packed with spirits, demons, angry ghosts, powerful sky gods, and superstitions so specific that you could literally be cursed for stepping over someone's bow. So buckle up, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's dive into some serious Mongol madness. Let's start with the big one, the eternal blue sky, or Tengri. This wasn't just some distant god the Mongols prayed to on special occasions. Tengri was everything: the sky, the weather, fate itself. When Genghis Khan said he was destined to conquer the world, he wasn't being arrogant. He genuinely believed Tengri had chosen him. Every victory was proof that the sky god approved. Every defeat meant they'd somehow angered Tengri and needed to figure out what they'd done wrong. This wasn't a god you could ignore or negotiate with. Tengri was always watching, always judging, and if you crossed him, your entire family, your tribe, maybe even your whole army could be wiped out. Talk about pressure. The Mongols believed that Genghis Khan himself was born with Tengri's blessing, literally sent from the heavens to unite the tribes and conquer the world. That's why challenging his authority wasn't just treason. It was blasphemy. You weren't just defying a man, you were defying the will of the sky itself. But Tengri wasn't the only spiritual force the Mongols worried about. They believed the world was absolutely crawling with spirits. Not the cute fairy tale kind. We're talking dangerous, unpredictable entities that lived in rivers, mountains, forests, rocks, basically everywhere. These weren't gods you prayed to for blessings. These were territorial spirits that you had to constantly appease or avoid pissing off. Cross a river the wrong way? You could anger the water spirit and drown. Camp in the wrong spot? The mountain spirit might send a rock slide to crush you. Even sitting in the wrong place in your ger could offend a household spirit. The Mongols were so paranoid about offending these spirits that they developed incredibly specific rules about everything. And I mean everything. Here's where it gets really specific and honestly kind of wild. The Mongols believed that certain everyday actions could cause serious spiritual contamination. For example, you absolutely could not step over another person's weapon, especially their bow. Bows were sacred objects with their own spirits, and stepping over one was essentially insulting both the weapon's spirit and its owner. If you did this, you'd bring bad luck to the owner and possibly curse yourself. Same thing with stepping over someone who was sitting down. You couldn't do it. You had to walk around them, because you'd be symbolically dominating them and disrupting their personal energy or life force. And if you accidentally stepped over someone, you'd better apologize immediately and maybe perform some kind of ritual to undo the damage, or that person could hold a grudge and possibly curse you back. Now let's talk about water, because the Mongols had a seriously complicated relationship with it. Remember from the hygiene video where I talked about how they rarely bathed because water was sacred? That wasn't just about practical scarcity, it was deeply spiritual. They believed that rivers and lakes had powerful spirits living in them, and disturbing those spirits by washing clothes, bathing, or especially urinating in water could bring catastrophic consequences. We're talking failed hunts, sick livestock, infertility, or even death. During summer, the Mongols would designate specific times when it was safe to interact with water for washing. But even then, you had to be extremely careful and respectful. Some shamans would perform rituals before major river crossings to appease the water spirits and ensure safe passage. And if someone drowned, that wasn't an accident. That was the water spirit claiming a sacrifice, and you'd better believe there would be rituals performed to prevent it from taking more victims. The Mongols were also absolutely terrified of thunder and lightning, which makes sense given that they lived on open grasslands with basically zero shelter during storms. But to them, thunderstorms weren't just dangerous weather, they were Tengri's anger made manifest. When lightning struck, that was the sky god literally reaching down to destroy something that had offended him. If lightning hit near your camp or killed someone, that was a sign that your group had done something seriously wrong, and you needed to figure out what immediately. Shamans would be called in to perform divination rituals to determine what had angered Tengri and what needed to be done to make amends. Sometimes entire camps would perform purification ceremonies, sacrificing animals and burning offerings to get back into the sky god's good graces. Speaking of shamans, these people were absolutely central to Mongol spiritual life. Shamans weren't like priests who just performed rituals. They were intermediaries between the human world and the spirit world. They could supposedly communicate with the dead, predict the future, heal the sick, curse enemies, and most importantly, figure out why bad things were happening and how to fix them. When someone got sick, the Mongols didn't just think, "Oh, they caught a cold." They believed the person's soul had been stolen by a demon or malicious spirit, and only a shaman could journey into the spirit world, find the stolen soul, and bring it back. Shamanic rituals involved going into trances, often aided by drumming, chanting, and sometimes fermented mare's milk, and then literally fighting spirits to retrieve lost souls or negotiate with them for better fortune. These weren't gentle ceremonies. Shamans would thrash around, scream, sometimes even injure themselves during these spiritual battles, and people believed it was real. If you recovered after a shaman's ritual, it proved the shaman had succeeded. If you died anyway, well, the demons were too strong, or maybe you were already doomed. Now, let's talk about death, because Mongol beliefs about the afterlife were fascinating and kind of terrifying. They believed that when you died, your soul didn't immediately go to some peaceful afterlife. Instead, it hung around for a while, and if you weren't properly honored or if you died badly, like in a shameful way or with unfinished business, your spirit could become a restless ghost that would haunt the living. These weren't friendly ghosts popping in to say hello. These were angry, vengeful spirits that could cause disease, crop failures, and bad luck for your entire family. That's why Mongol funerals were so elaborate and secretive, especially for important people like Khans. They'd bury the dead in unmarked graves, sometimes killing everyone who witnessed the burial to keep the location secret. Why, you may ask? To prevent grave robbers, and also to prevent enemies from finding the grave and disturbing the spirit, which could curse the entire Mongol nation. The Mongols also had very specific beliefs about menstruation that we touched on briefly in other videos, but let's go deeper. They believed menstrual blood had dangerous spiritual power. It could corrupt sacred objects, anger spirits, and even cause weapons to lose their effectiveness in battle. Menstruating women were kept away from certain sacred spaces and objects, not because of misogyny exactly, but because of genuine spiritual fear. At the same time, some Mongols also believed menstrual blood could be used in certain protective or cursing rituals. It was paradoxical, both dangerous and powerful, something to fear and something to potentially harness. Women who knew how to use these beliefs could sometimes gain a kind of indirect power, though it was risky. If you were accused of using menstrual blood to curse someone, you could be executed as a witch. Let's talk about animals, because the Mongols believed animals could be spiritually significant in really specific ways. Certain animals were considered sacred or spiritually powerful. Wolves, for example, were revered because Mongol legend said they were descended from a sacred she-wolf. Killing a wolf wasn't just hunting. It was potentially offending a powerful spirit ancestor. Eagles were also sacred, believed to be messengers between the earthly realm and Tengri. That's why eagle hunting was such a prestigious activity. You weren't just hunting with a bird, you were working with a creature that had a direct connection to the sky god. On the flip side, certain animals were considered bad omens. If a black crow landed on your jur or followed you, that was a sign of impending death. If your horse suddenly refused to move forward for no apparent reason, it meant there was a demon or evil spirit blocking the path, and you'd better turn around immediately. Mongols were also paranoid about curses and the evil eye. They believed that jealousy, envy, or malicious intent from another person could literally cause you harm through spiritual means. If someone complimented your child too enthusiastically or stared at your livestock too long, you'd worry they were giving you the evil eye, cursing you with their jealous thoughts. To protect against this, Mongols wore amulets and talismans, often made from animal bones, stones, or metals that shamans had blessed. Children especially were loaded up with protective charms because they were considered vulnerable to spiritual attack. And if you suspected someone had cursed you, you'd go to a shaman who would perform a divination ritual to identify the person and then perform a counter-curse to send the bad energy back to them. Spiritual warfare was a real thing. Here's something that'll blow your mind. The Mongols had incredibly specific beliefs about directions and spatial orientation. They believed that certain directions were spiritually significant and that positioning yourself or your possessions wrong could bring disaster. South was associated with fire, warmth, and life. North was associated with cold, death, and evil spirits. That's why the door of a jur always faced south, to welcome good energy and keep evil spirits out. The back of the jur, which faced north, was where honored guests and the family head sat, because it was the most protected position, farthest from potential spiritual danger. You couldn't just randomly arrange your living space. Everything had to be positioned according to spiritual principles, or you risked inviting disaster. The Mongols also believed in prophetic dreams with an intensity that affected major historical decisions. Genghis Khan himself reportedly made military decisions based on dreams he believed were messages from Tengri. Before major battles, shamans would interpret the dreams of commanders to determine whether the sky god favored the attack or if they should wait. If a Khan had a bad dream before a campaign, that campaign might be delayed or cancelled entirely, even if everything else was ready to go. Dreams of white horses, eagles, or clear blue skies were excellent omens. Dreams of darkness, falling, or dirty water were terrible signs. The entire empire's direction could change based on what someone saw in their sleep. And finally, let's talk about something the Mongols feared more than anything: being forgotten. The Mongols believed that as long as people remembered your name and told your stories, your spirit remained powerful in the afterlife. But if you were forgotten, if your name died with the last person who knew it, your spirit would fade into nothingness. That's why oral tradition was so important, why they told stories about their ancestors constantly, and why dying without honor or leaving no legacy was the worst possible fate. A warrior would rather die in glorious battle and be remembered forever than live a long, peaceful, forgotten life. That belief drove their conquest as much as any material ambition. Genghis Khan wanted to build an empire so vast that his name would never be forgotten. And honestly, it worked. We're still talking about him 800 years later. So there you have it. The Mongols didn't just conquer half the world through superior tactics and toughness. They navigated a spiritual minefield every single day, trying not to anger gods, spirits, ancestors, and demons while interpreting signs, following taboos, and performing rituals to keep themselves and their families safe. They saw the supernatural in everything, in storms, in dreams, in the way a horse moved, in the direction the wind blew. And they believed that one wrong step, one broken taboo, could doom not just you, but everyone you loved. If you made it through this deep dive into Mongol superstitions, hit that like button, subscribe to Mongol Madness, and drop a comment telling me which belief surprised you most. The evil eye? The cursed menstrual blood? The sacred water spirits? Let me know. And remember, next time you're having a bad day, at least you don't have to worry about whether you accidentally stepped over someone's bow and cursed your entire bloodline. See you in the next one.